Schaeffer Cox, rock solid friends. I want to point out that 12 people were arrested in connection with me, and 6 of those were indicted in the same case with me. None of us had ever been in any sort of trouble before. All of us had families and careers and homes and a lot to lose. Every one of us was looking at life in prison. It was pretty scary. The feds made everyone the same offer. Testify against Schaeffer Cox, and you'll be home in time for dinner. Any of them could have taken the offer. Not one of them did. In the federal system, that is unheard of. I'm very proud of the moral fortitude of my co-defendants. Yes, it's true that none of us had done anything wrong, so there was nothing for any of us to testify about. But that's not how the federal court works. The prosecutors will arrange and present the lies to the jury for you. You just have to take the stand and nod your head when they point at you. Still, nobody rolled. The very thought of a group of people that couldn't be broken was utterly terrifying to the feds. It made them go into a fit of furious desperation. They started by indicting Coleman Barney's 8-month pregnant wife, Rachel. She was in no way connected to anything at all. She hadn't been under investigation. They had no audios of her. They had zero evidence of any kind. The only reason they went after Rachel was because Coleman wouldn't testify against me. The feds told him Rachel, who is already mother to their 4 young children, was going to give birth to their 5th child in jail, and the state was going to take the baby if Coleman didn't cooperate with the government. At this point, I wouldn't have faulted Coleman if he had thrown me under the bus to save his pregnant wife. But Coleman is a God-fearing man, and lying for the feds was simply not an option his conscience would allow him to consider. We have emails between the Polar Pen prosecutors where they are laughing about how many kids the Barneys have and how indicting Rachel is, like smashing her with a sledgehammer, and will really supercharge the deal with Coleman. It should be noted that even when the Chicago Mafia was at its peak, they had enough residual morality that they wouldn't attack people's innocent families. The feds, on the other hand, have retained no such virtue. Luckily, a judge let Rachel out on bail and she didn't give birth in jail. Later, when they gave up on rolling Coleman, they dropped Rachel's charges, but Rachel was severely traumatized by what the feds did to her. When Coleman Barney wouldn't break, they turned their sledgehammer on Mike Anderson. Mike is sweet and quiet and sensitive. Jail was hard on him, but he too refused to join the feds in their thuggery. They tortured Mike so bad that he tried to kill himself, but he never gave the feds the lies they wanted from him. They put Mike in a cell totally naked. They called it suicide watch, which is just a sick bureaucratic euphemism for protracted physical and psychological torture. They would crank the heat so hot that the floor would burn his naked body. They would turn the heat down so cold the water in the toilet would freeze. Every 30 minutes, these positively subhuman guards would come by and yell at Mike like he was a bad dog or something. They wouldn't let him sleep or shave or even eat regular food. While they kept him in this unbearable condition, they gave him a steady stream of affidavits to read about how we, his friends, had committed horrible crimes behind his back and then tried to blame it on him. Of course, we hadn't. This was all a pack of lies that the audio recordings thoroughly debunk. It was just an FBI tool to try to get him to crack. The law required the prosecution to disclose the identities of all the undercover informants to the defense. Not surprisingly, given the misconduct of these same prosecutors in related political cases, they did not comply with their disclosure obligations. This is a felony crime on their part. But they took it one step further when they not only refused to disclose Aaron Bennett as an informant, but audaciously had him visit Mike regularly at the jail, pretending to be his friend, in an effort to manipulate him for the feds. The government is not allowed, under court rules, to contact people like this when they are represented by counsel. But these polar pen prosecutors have a long history of disregarding court rules. Bennett continued to work on Mike Anderson right up until the state court threw out the whole case. The state judge evidently did not find the government's accusations against us very credible when the prosecution could not answer his questions about why they never in 2 years applied for any sort of warrant if the government was, during that very time, documenting all of our horrible criminal actions, as they now claim to have done. The truth is, the government never applied for a warrant because they had only documented how they struck out for 2 years straight of trying to trick, bully, or coax us into committing crimes we had no inclination to commit. It wasn't until Bill Fulton's death threat ultimatum caused me to pack up to move out of the country that the feds decided to just arrest me anyway, throw a bunch of unsupported charges at me, and see if any of it stuck. But because there was no evidence of a crime, the charges didn't stick. This left me with no state charges at all, and only some low-level gun tax stamp charges in federal court. Mike Anderson had no charges left, state or federal, so he was released. The feds had broken down the doors at Mike's house and otherwise destroyed his home. Then they left the doors open when they left, so the pipes all froze and Mike's house was unlivable. This meant Mike was dumped out the back door of the jail, bankrupt, homeless, and crazy-eyed for months of treatment that the UN has denounced as torture. But guess who was there to take him in? Informant Aaron Bennett. Mike, his wife, and his 2 kids moved in with an FBI informant. Bennett tried to convince Mike that I was all bad and that he should cooperate with the feds to prosecute me. Mike's position was basically, look, maybe Schaeffer's a violent monster like you say, but if he is, I've never seen it. All he ever talked about around me was liberty, the Constitution, protecting our families, and non-violent activism. This put the polar pen prosecutors in a real bind because with nobody turning on me, all they were left with was paid informant's testimony that could be torn to pieces on the stand by playing the dozens and dozens of audio clips of me explaining how resorting to violent crimes would be a fruitless gesture and no good could come of it. That quote right there is a quote on the audios that never was played for the jury. Let me read it again. Resorting to violent crimes would be a fruitless gesture and no good could come from it. There was no evidence of a crime, so the feds couldn't hold Mike, let alone twist his arm into lying for them, which is what they needed to get more than just the unpaid tax stamp charges on me. So here's what they did. Even though their own secret audio recordings corroborated perfectly Mike's position that I wasn't up to anything wrong or illegal, they called him into the grand jury. When Mike told the grand jury that I wasn't the guy the feds were trying to make me out to be, Assistant U.S. Attorney Stephen Scrocky came unglued and threw a Caligula fit. He sent a SWAT team out to Bennett's house where Mike was staying and arrested him on what's called material witness warrant. Mike was back to jail, back to the torture, and back to being asked to tell the feds what they wanted to hear if he wanted out. This was a total abuse of the material witness warrant, which is designed for witnesses who both have incriminating evidence and are actively evading law enforcement. Mike was neither of those. This was just the feds punishing him for not lying. Mike had an attorney, was honoring subpoenas to the grand jury, and was living in the same house with an FBI undercover informant. He didn't need to be sent back to jail with no charges, but he was, and it was more than he could take. He agreed to testify at trial and was released. I don't blame him for doing what he needed to do to get out of that hellhole. And anyway, his trial testimony was helpful to the defense. I'm just disgusted how the feds mistreated a good man like Mike Anderson, and with how they thumbed their nose at the law and judge by not disclosing Aaron Bennett as an informant. We thought Bennett might be an informant, so before trial we sent a letter to U.S. Attorney specifically asking them to disclose his role to the defense if in fact he was working for them or any other agency. They replied that they could neither confirm nor deny anything relating to Bennett. So the next time we were in front of the judge, we brought up their discovery obligations to him. The judge asked AUSA Scrocky if he was complying with all of his obligations to turn over evidence to the defense. Scrocky looked the judge in the eye and told a big fat lie. "Oh, yes, Your Honor." It wasn't until after trial and before sentencing that documents surfaced that confirmed Bennett was an informant. Bennett was crucial to the defense because when he first approached me and started pushing for violence, I told him it was a bad idea. If the feds disclosed Bennett, they would also have to turn over all of those police reports. Not only that, but when Bennett tried to disclose threats to persuade me to come over to his violent way of thinking, I went to my friend Steve Cooper, who is the federal prosecutor in Fairbanks, and told him there were some dangerous violent nuts that I was worried about and that I needed some advice on how to deal with them. The Polar Pen team didn't want to further discredit their already evaporating case by getting into that can of worms, not while all the other Polar Pen cases were falling apart at the same time. Instead of doing the right thing, admitting they were wrong, and letting me go, the feds used their sledgehammer on my friends. When that didn't work, they filed a motion to suppress all their own evidence and audio recordings, which corroborated my innocence, and rely solely on the testimony of their overpaid conman J.R. Olson. This apparently carried the day because I got convicted, but it's not fair that we weren't able to expose Olson as a liar on the stand because we were barred from playing the recordings he himself had made and totally contradicted his testimony. I think that the judge erred in restricting us like that, and I hope the Ninth Circuit will agree and overturn the conviction. Unlike Olson, my friends and co-defendants were all honest, hard-working people with no criminal record and a good name. If any of them had agreed to lie for the feds, they could have done it and came off credible, but none of them would do it. It's thanks to them that I have a winnable appeal. I'm proud to know every one of them, and I owe them a debt of gratitude for their steadfast integrity.